The Dow Jones hit a two-year high today as the stock continues to rise following the presidential election. Experts say this comes after investors having certainty of who would be in office and Trump proposing corporate tax cuts drove investors to put more into the market. However, the risk of a recession still looms overhead as a growth in unemployment over the past year has left concerns. Professor of economics at SUNY Oswego, Ranjit Dighe, says due to unemployment numbers, we may enter a slight recession.
We've had some strong job reports, but there's about 500,000 more unemployed people now than there were a year ago. There's also a lot more employed people because, the labor force and the population are growing. But it's a concern. The unemployment rate has ticked up a little bit. It was a bit below 4%. Now it's a bit above 4%. So we could be, entering a slight recession.
The unemployment rate in the United States rose from 3.5% in July 2023 to 4.3% this last July.